What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast live from Indianapolis, the site of the 2025 NFL Combine. He's Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. We have a lot to talk about. It's been well over a week since the last time we came to you. I did a couple of shows with Mike Giannetti from Spot Trek and then Joe Biscaglia from The Athletic. Now the band is back together, and we are ready to break a ton of things down as we kind of take our first look at this offseason here together. Ryan, how are you?
Hey, I am doing great, Matt. Excited to get in everything that Sean McDermott had to say today and, all things Bills.
We are brought to you, as always, by Tops Friendly Markets, and there is no better read in the business right now than Ryan Talbot and Tops Friendly Markets.
That's right. And right now, Tops has a family meal deal, chuck roast. Buy one, get 7 items free. Boneless beef chuck roast, and when you get that, you get more than $17 in value. White potatoes, free. Yellow onions for free. Whole carrots. Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. Ben's Original Ready Rice, Bakery Fresh Italian Bread, and a Pepsi 1 liter of soda. Buy one, get 7 free. Head over to Tops this week.
So the Combine week, it's interesting from a beat reporter standpoint because we arrive in town and we get a chance to, spend some time with Sean today, and then Brandon Beane will go tomorrow. The prospects are fun. It's kind of like an introduction to that process as we really streamline draft coverage. But really it's about checking in with the coach and the general manager and kind of setting up the offseason. There were some interesting comments today I want to get to. James Cook, Keon Coleman specifically, and we'll flesh out a couple of other things. But before we get into it, I want to tell a funny story. So the reason we were a couple minutes behind is because I was checking in with McDermott after the press conference. And on one of my questions, he answered it and said, he called me Ryan. And so as soon as it was done, I was like, wait a second, is he calling me Ryan because Ryan O'Halloran from the Buffalo News is standing a couple down? Obviously, I do shout with Ryan Talbot, so I'm like, where is he going here? So I met with him afterwards, and I asked him, it's Ryan Talbot. So Sean McDermott, big shout fan, apparently.
I guess so. Hey, I'll take it. Glad that's the reason why. You told me you had a good story, so that makes my day.
Very good. So speaking of somebody who wants their day made, James Cook has been very vocal over the last couple of weeks since the end of the season. I have a lot of thoughts on this and how it's gone about. But if you could, you were really active on the site the last couple of weeks on the James Cook story as he's kind of made it public that he wants a new contract. He wants a big contract. Bring us up to speed of where that's at.
Yeah, so, James Cook is taking a very public stance with contract negotiations. Obviously has 1 year left on his rookie deal, set to make a little over $5 million in his final year, but he's kind of let it be known that he is looking for $15 million on average. He went on Instagram Live and he pinned his own comment saying $15 million. He retweeted someone on X that said that James Cook is worth $15 million. And then he went on a podcast with Shannon Sharp and Chad Johnson, where he didn't mention that number again, but he talked about standing on business and, running backs deserve to get paid. And he doesn't want to be a distraction or a cancer is the term he used in the locker room. But he's, fighting for what he feels like he deserves.
Yeah, so I think the first thought I have here is I've seen a lot of fan reaction, and I'm not necessarily saying it's wrong to have this reaction, but the reaction is like, oh man, another Stephon Diggs. Like he's going to create drama. He's all about himself, move on, trade him, don't sign him back, all that kind of thing. I think that's a little bit hasty. And I say that because I do think that in this day and age, especially at the running back position, guys that go out and have big time seasons have to find a way to advocate for themselves, right? Like that market, the running back market is a really tricky thing. And I think him coming out and saying he doesn't want to be a distraction is the truth. I mean, if you talk to anybody inside that building, they rave about the kind of teammate that James Cook is, the kind of work ethic he has inside the building. I don't think he's necessarily asking for something that he doesn't plan on earning, continuing to earn, or thinking he's going to earn on the other side of that contract. So that's, to me, where it should start. I don't think that you should necessarily turn on James Cook because he wants to be paid what he feels he's worth. And what he's worth, Ryan, is going to be based on what the market tells him he's worth. And, you're looking at a little bit of a renaissance at the running back position. I don't think James Cook should be compared to Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. Those are elite level backs that play a huge percentage of snaps that their offenses are really built around. But I do think it's fair to say that James Cook is on the tier below that. And whether that lands him at a Josh Jacobs kind of contract or that kind of money, I think it's more than fair that he wants that he thinks that he's played to a level that warrants that kind of contract. And I think that in the end, if the Bills do decide to extend him, there's a reason for that. And I think they feel that he's a big part of their offense and will continue to be that.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the season, Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane's pressers, they were glowing with praise of James Cook to the point where I said, man, he's kind of skyrocketing up my list of guys they're going to re-sign. There's a lot of players. There's Christian Benford, Terrell Bernard, Khalil Shakir, James Cook, possibly Greg Rousseau. Those guys all in a bucket of who's going to get extended and when. And the way they talked about Cook made me think that he was going to skyrocket up that list. Then you get to that public stance a little bit. You still have a rookie, that final year of your rookie contract left. I didn't know if that was the best way of going about it, but you heard from Sean McDermott today. Sean, he said that Brandon Beane's going to kind of handle that, the contract negotiations. That's his forte. And when it comes to James Cook, negotiations, you probably start high. You want a certain number in mind, and maybe the Bills and Cook don't reach that number, but they find somewhere in the middle that makes both of them happy. And maybe it's the guaranteed money that he gets in the new deal over the first 3 years. And it meets a certain criteria that he's looking for, because I agree with you. You look at Saquon Barkley, 28 years old, 3-down back, dynamic player. Derrick Henry proving at 31 years old that he can still go this year. Just a freak of an athlete, a special type of back. You look at guys like that, and then you have James Cook, who hasn't really been a 3-down back yet. And he touched upon that in that podcast with Chad Johnson and with Shannon Sharp, saying that he wants to be on the field on those crucial downs, be more of a 3-down back. And I don't know if that'll ever happen in Buffalo. They obviously drafted Ray Davis. They like Ty Johnson, who's a free agent. He could be back in the picture. But I do think you're going to see his role expand in this final season of his rookie deal. And it wouldn't shock me if they were able to meet somewhere in the middle here, so that way it's not dragging out into the final year of his contract.
I just think that the overall impact in 2024 for James Cook on this offense, you can make the argument that outside of maybe Josh Allen, and there's good argument for Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins, Cook's impact was felt almost more than anybody. And in a lot of ways, this offense's identity is built around, I know he's not playing this crazy amount of snaps, but around what he does and what he is as a threat in the offense, what he can be as a pass catcher, which I don't even think they've really even hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of what he can be as a receiver in this offense, which is what they drafted him to be in the first place. And I also think what we're going to get a chance to see next year is what this looks like if the Bills are able to go out and add a real impact player at the receiver position. I think Mac Hollins was really solid last year. I'm advocating for them to bring him back. We're going to talk about that more over the course of this week and beyond as we get into our big picture offseason plan for the Bills. Curtis Samuel, there's room for him to grow in this offense as well. Keon Coleman, we're going to get to him in a second. I think the Bills have to add a legitimate wide receiver option. What flavor that wide receiver is, we can get into that and talk about different variations. But I think if you add another playmaker at receiver, that potentially unlocks James Cook even more. Now the teams really have to fear maybe the deep part of the field and Josh Allen as a passer in that area.
Yeah, and real quick on the wide receiver market, it's going to be tough for the Bills, because if T. Higgins gets the franchise tag, that's all the rumor and all that. All of a sudden, the wide receiver free agents aren't overly appealing. You're going to get some people overpaying for guys possibly like Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs coming off of a serious injury, more than what the Bills would obviously be looking. Not like they would ever consider bringing Diggs back, obviously, into the fold. This isn't a particularly strong wide receiver draft either. You can still find guys in the middle rounds, but I'm with you. The Bills do need that guy, and Sean McDermott touched upon that today, stretching the field vertically and horizontally. And I do think that if Curtis Samuel can stay healthy, it's a big if. He's been banged up in his career. he can play a big role in that. And you expect it. You see it in the topic here. Keon Coleman, they're expecting a leap from him. And Khalil Shakir keeps getting better year after year. They need another guy. What that flavor ends up being, we'll see. It's going to be based on who's available for the right price in free agency. There are still some intriguing guys that are going to be out there on the market. A Darius Slayton, for instance, but he could cash in as well. He could fit into that bucket that I was talking about. But if you do add a guy like that, it does make James Cook that much more of a weapon as a guy that you can line up in the slot or line up on the outside and even in the backfield and have him go out for a screen or go out for those short passes, because then it's harder to account for everyone on this roster.
You bring up Darius Slayton, and he's kind of the guy I have circled in the free agent group as somebody that I think the Bills should definitely be interested in and have the conversations. But I wonder if he doesn't end up being like the Darnell Mooney of this year's free agent class, a guy that, maybe under the radar a little bit, but because of the lack of other options is going to get paid a little bit more. I was looking on SpotTrack.com. His market value was listed at $15 million per season, and I'm out at that number. I think if you can get him closer to 10, maybe bake in some incentives to pair him up in a situation with Josh Allen, you sell that till the cows come home. But to your point, I don't know if that's very plausible for a guy that, if T. Higgins is franchise tagged, he's going to be one of the premier options on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Another guy to keep in mind is Joshua Palmer. Checks a lot of the boxes, hasn't necessarily ascended into that top flight role, but in terms of what the Bills are looking for, I think he's a really good fit. I wanted to see what his number is on here. Market value. I'm actually on the site right now. Okay, $4.3 million. It was his. So that a lot more digestible if you're a Bills fan. If you're Brandon Beane trying to bring someone in here, definitely someone that I would be after in terms of maybe a need where you're looking at the potential and the upside and the fit in this offense.
I want to get to Keon Coleman next. Before we get there, become a Shout Buffalo Bills Insider. This week is a great week to get your 2-week free trial. We're going to be texting a bunch of stuff from the combine here, from player availability. Brandon Beane tomorrow will be firing up a lot of different takes. I've been having a conversation with a couple of people in the Insider text line, and that's what it's for, Ryan. It's for us to kind of connect with fans at a deeper level. I was having a conversation. I believe his name was Jeff. If I'm mistaking the name, I'm sorry. We were talking about Joey Bosa earlier today, back and forth a little bit. Some of my thoughts on if he gets freed up. Little things like that maybe don't even make it to the podcast sometimes. We're having those conversations on the Insider text line a lot of times. 716-528-6727. It's a 2-week free trial, so try it out. $3.99 a month after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we can talk a little Bosa here. We can also talk a little Keon Coleman. We have a few super chats in here that are along the lines of Keon Coleman in this year's draft. So we'll talk a little bit about the comments from Sean McDermott, but let's get into the two comments. First one from Joseph. Can Keon improve his separation? Seems that there's too many slot and contested catch guys and not enough vertical threats who can separate from man. I'll start with this one. If you check the separation graphs this past season, Keon Coleman was in a league of his own, and it wasn't a good league of his own. It was on the other side.
Was that league the CFL?
Yeah, it was on a side you don't want to be on necessarily. Now,
right.
He is a contested catch guy. He did show a knack for that pre-injury. Still made a few catches post, but was not quite the same player. I don't think his separation can improve significantly enough where it becomes, I'm not even going to say a strength, but maybe a non-factor. I think separation is always going to be an issue there for him personally. What do you think on that?
I think there's a couple things that go into this. Number one, what they ask him to be and do at his age and his understanding. Like, one of the things that Sean said about him is, like, sometimes rookies come into the league and you have to learn what you don't know about playing in the NFL, like what it's like to face press coverage in the NFL compared to when he was in college. His stops at Michigan State and at Florida State, right? Like, it's a much different deal than facing perhaps at times the number one cornerback on NFL teams on a week-to-week basis. So that's the first part of it for me. And the other part of it is, like, okay, you're Keon Coleman. You know this is the narrative out on you right now, and it's not just a narrative. The graphs show it. The numbers show it. You are not getting the amount of separation that a borderline first-round wide receiver should be getting, especially with the athletic profile that he has. I know it was a knock on him during the draft process, but this has to be an area of his game that he takes to the next level. And to me, what stood out so much to me from Sean McDermott at the end of the season and then reiterating and double downing on it today is how much they're kind of motivating Keon Coleman with what they're saying in the media, right? Like, it was a rocky first season. He started off where momentum was building, and when he came back, it wasn't good enough. They're not mincing any words. I think that there's a very deliberate effort to, for a team that saw, I think Gabe Davis had a nice ascension over the first couple of seasons, and his production kind of petered out. He was unavailable a little bit of a different situation. You think about Justin Shorter as a complete miss in the draft, right? So these rookies, I think, maybe trying to get out ahead of things. Khalil Shakir had a kind of slow and steady progression. He never had a dip off, and his biggest season was this last one. But I think they want to be deliberate in how they approach year 1 to year 2 jump. And there's a potential big jump in store for Keon Coleman. And depending on what they add at that other wide receiver spot, we talked about Darius Slayton. I still think Amari Cooper's in play to bring him back. I'd like to see a healthy Amari Cooper in this offense and what that can mean for Keon Coleman. Because if you remember, Ryan, the real first spike for Coleman happened after the trade for Amari Cooper.
Yeah, 100%. And Cooper and his comments about never being on a team like this before, winning being so important, maybe he does take a team-friendly deal. That's tough to ask a veteran receiver to do when this is realistically possibly his last final chance at a payday or another payday, but he's made good money over his career. But the Bills sometimes sugarcoat their words in terms of how players' performance and what they think. And like you said, they're not mincing words when it comes to Keon Coleman. I would even say Cole Bishop today too about, we'll see. We want to see more development from these guys. We expect more. And I think that's the right message, because I get it. The later you draft in rounds, the harder it is to get these hits, but you're still seeing other teams find guys. You're still seeing guys come in other situations and other teams and contribute, and not just late in round 1, but in the middle rounds of drafts. So the Bills do need to get more out of their late round picks, obviously they didn't have a first round pick this year. They traded out of the first round, but out of their second round picks, out of, this entire draft class. Overall, when you look at how they performed this year, the entire class as a whole, it was pretty underwhelming. I know there weren't a lot of starting opportunities or spots, but it's still something where you want more. And that kind of leads into a Boom Boom's question here. Our friend Mark, do you think McDermott regrets not using the 28th pick last year and not taking Xavier Worthy for that speedy deep threat and then taking Coleman? I wouldn't say he regrets it. The Bills did talk a lot in the offseason about the need for speed, and then they went the exact other route. But you look at this offense and the way they were running the ball this past year. Jumbo linemen, they like receivers that are bigger in stature and can block. It's why Mac Hollins played so much. It's why they like guys like Khalil Shakir who can block out on the edge. And that's not Worthy's game. Now, Worthy came on late in the season. I'm not going to, Super Bowl, I know he had a few scores, but that came when the game was out of reach. He definitely developed into more of a pure route runner, not just a speed guy. And I expect him to continue to develop in that area. And sure, the Bills could use a guy like that, but I think it's too early to say that they regret not staying at 28. But I totally get it, because they did say that they had a need for some speed on offense, and then they did a 180.
Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to McDermott and how he just talked about it at the podium when asked about, the combine and evaluating players. And he made a point to say, like, it's not always the guys that run a great 40-yard dash that turn into great football players. It's not the Olympics, right? Like, you're not just running track and field events. But it's kind of a weird time to say that, because Xavier Worthy had such an impactful first season, and, juxtaposed to Keon Coleman's impact in that playoff game, even the regular season game. I think that Xavier Worthy did a lot to what he put on tape, his ability to separate, his big play impact. The Bills need to find their version of that. And the good thing about it is you saw the version of the offense without that particular player succeed in the way that it did this year. So now I think you have to be excited about, and Joe Brady, if you're him, you're really excited about the idea of adding that missing element as being the one that really takes this offense to the next level. But to me, I still go back to the question marks on defense, what they have to do on the defensive line, remaking that this offseason. I'm more than ever, after seeing the salary cap number come out, in the camp that the Bills must make a big swing on their defensive line, whether it be interior, edge rusher, however they go about it. The Myles Garrett conversation, Trey Hendrickson, Max Crosby, we're going to continue to have it for the next couple of months. but there's no excuse now. I mean, the salary cap's going to be sitting there at 280 million about. They're going to be right about at that number before they do any kind of work. So we could be sitting here looking at between 40 and 60 million dollars of cap space for the Bills. That's the kind of operating maneuverability, if you will, for a general manager to take a big swing. And here's the other thing, and I talked about this on the radio this week. Myles Garrett, I get what Brandon Beane says when he says you're never one player away. But Myles Garrett isn't just an addition of one player.
Exactly.
You bring in Myles Garrett, and of course, his contributions can be compared to two players, right? But also what it means for other guys on this defensive line and in general at second and third level, that they're going to be able to produce at a different level because of the attention that a Myles Garrett garners.
Yeah, the attention that he garners, the way he could help bring even more out of a Greg Rousseau, the way he's going to help Ed Oliver on the interior. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk. I've been following it from the Cleveland perspective. There are some people in Cleveland that believe that he will not be traded until after June 1st, which is interesting because the way the contract is, the dead cap, everything else.
Right.
But that would mean that no draft picks would be in play this year for the team that acquired him. I think that'd be appealing to the Bills. The Bills would then have their first round pick, 2 second round picks, and be in a good spot to address some of their other needs. This is an extremely deep defensive tackle draft. There's a few that I would love to see the Bills go after in round 1 if they're there, but if the right guy's not there, they could address a different need, cornerback, or even someone on the offense side of the ball if they want to go that route and get it with one of their second round picks, one of these other great defensive tackles. So what we'll have to wait and see. We've seen teams eat dead cap. The Bills did it last year with Stephon Diggs, so it's not a guarantee that that's the route Cleveland goes, but if it is, the Bills are going to have some good picks to address some needs, and then they could still take a swing where you could get a lot of money off the books with some of your own moves and make a deal for Myles Garrett after June 1st.
Yeah, the post-June 1st move to me makes the most sense because I think the Bills want to take some swings, particularly at defensive tackle in this draft, and having the capital that they have. I don't think you want to, get rid of a lot of those picks in a potential deal this year. And on the Cleveland side, you really want to cash in on the draft next year when it's probably going to be a better quarterback class. You could take a couple of picks. Look at the Bills blueprint from back in 2018. Yeah. They loaded up on picks, gave themselves some ability to be mobile in the draft, moved up and got their guy in Josh Allen. So we'll talk about that more as the offseason goes along. Before we go any further, though, I want to talk about the special team situation. Wingnuts. This Saturday night, we are going to be at the brand new location on Genesee. I'm going to put the address in the show notes, the description below. So check out that if you're listening on the audio platform or any of the video platforms. We are going to do a big end of the week combine wrap-up show from Wingnuts right by the airport. It's connected to the Buffalo Airport Hotel. Ryan, you stopped in there, I think, recently, right?
Yeah, I was there this past week. I was in town on Wednesday. I stopped there for lunch with the family. I was up in town to do a site night with Atwall Eye Care, looking into some LASIK surgery. So made sure that was our stop for lunch on the day. And beautiful place, huge, tons of space. We love both Wingnuts locations. This one, they have some ideas about where we'll be for our live shows. And I think the fans that come in to watch, they're going to be happy. It's going to a little bit more room. We've seen, Wingnuts packs them in, and rightfully so. Best wings in Buffalo. I think this new location is going to be great, though, for Shout, and we'll have our first episode there on Saturday night.
So the really cool thing about the new location, and we're going to be basically splitting these things up. We'll be at the new location 1 month. We'll be at the Bar and Grill over in Amherst another month. We're going to be at both places. We're going to really spend our time at both. But the cool thing about this one is I know one issue that people have is they come, they get these delicious wings. They're at the table with their friends and their family. And if you're in the restaurant part, you can't really watch the show unless you come back out to the bar area. In this one, I think it's going to be set up in a way where you can watch the show while you're sitting and eating with your friends and family. Not a lot of mobility required. So it's going to be exciting from that perspective to see how it works out.
Yeah, like I said, there's not a bad seat in the house there. They did a fantastic job. If anyone was ever at I think it was like Sports Bar 365. Nice. It was a nice place, but they've really modernized it. A lot of cool stuff there. Right attached to the Buffalo Hotel. So if you're traveling in for the show, you have a spot you could stay that night. Well worth the trip.
All right, let's get to the special teams coordinator. Last time we talked to Sean McDermott, he said that he wasn't planning on making a change at that spot. Matthew Smiley fired a few days later. They've moved on to Chris Tabor. His last stop was in Carolina. We talked a little bit about him, I believe, on a show a couple weeks ago. I think this was the move that had to be made. And hearing Sean talk about Chris Tabor today, he's a guy that they've kind of come up the ranks together in the league, never really working together, but somebody that Sean McDermott said he's respected for a long time. And it's one of those things where Sean McDermott proved in recent history what it can mean when there's a similar scenario. Aaron Cromer fits the bill, right? Somebody that he had never technically worked with, but he's heard great things about, has grown a great deal of respect, not working together and then wanting to kind of pair together to see what they can do. Sean McDermott is very passionate about special teams and what that can mean for his football team. It seems like he's really excited about the addition of Chris Tabor. And listen, when you finish 28th in DVOA and special teams last season, I get all the excuses. It wasn't good enough with Matthew Smiley. They needed to make a change, and it seems like they're excited about the guy that they got.
And they should be excited about the guy that they got. I know that after the move was made, I shouldn't say a lot of fans that I interacted with said, oh, another Carolina guy. Well, one, they weren't ever in Carolina together. He was the interim head coach there, special teams coordinator. They had great special teams play in Carolina with Chris Tabor there. NFLPA survey in 2023, he was voted as the second best special teams coordinator in the league. Players respect him. They like him a lot. He gets the most out of his players. I think that one is going to help the Bills in terms of maybe addressing some special teams additions in free agency this year. There's going to be guys that Tabor can hand select. Maybe he's had them on the Carolina team before. Maybe he just knows from his experience in the league some guys to kind of pinpoint, bring in here at minimum or near minimum salaries that can, reinforce that unit. Because like you said, special teams was Sean McDermott's baby especially early on in this tenure. He felt like that was just as important as offense and defense. That unit had to be great. They've slipped the last 2 years. I think Tabor's going to help right the ship, so to speak, and get them closer to where they were in the past with the early Sean McDermott teams. And if they can do that, it's going to help field position. It's going to help in so many other areas. So Tabor, though, a great hire. There were some big names out there. Darren Rizzi at the time. I think everyone had him, though, associated with the Broncos. Sure enough, he went there. Some great college possible hires there, but I think the way that the Bills went with this was the right move.
He also talked about the addition of Rob Nielsen, who in his previous 2 stops was a defensive coordinator. They're bringing him in, Sean McDermott said, to focus specifically on the defensive line. And he's obviously going to have other roles. He's in a senior advisor role on defense. He can kind of make his way around, but that's his specialty. I mean, going back to his time in New Orleans, if you go back and look at some of those teams, Trey Hendrickson's explosion in that defense with New Orleans that last year was under Nielsen's watch on the defensive line. He helped really develop him. And you think about what Nielsen could mean potentially for Dwayne Carter, who's developing on the defensive line. You think about a Greg Rousseau, who has obviously taken all of these big strides, but maybe there's another level to unlock. If you see a year like Trey Hendrickson had in his contract year from Greg Rousseau next year, that takes this defense to a whole nother level on top of what they could potentially be adding with a big swing or what they do in the draft. So I think, to me, as much as Tabor maybe changes the math on special teams, which I think is good, the Nielsen under the radar hire here is something that I think we're going to be talking a lot about in 2025.
Yeah, really high on that move. I wrote in the article about getting the most out of the defensive line talent that he worked with. Had 2 really good years. You mentioned Hendrickson, and Hendrickson really did credit him with helping with the technique and helping him kind of bring the best out of his game. But from 2017 to 2020, Nielsen's defensive lines with the Saints were 3rd overall in pressure percentage and 3rd in total sacks. In 2023, the Falcons were 10th in the NFL in pressure rate, 23%, which was impressive because they were 17th among all teams in blitzing. So they weren't doing it via the blitz. They were doing it with their front four, and they're just their defensive front. And they also allowed the 8th fewest passing yards that year. So he has gotten a lot out of his units, whether it's been as a defensive coordinator. And I do think that is a good move. And, Nikki G in the comments say, so what you're saying is Hendrickson's coming to Buffalo. Love it. Wouldn't rule it out, to be quite honest. There's only so much money the Bengals have. He wanted to trade last season. It never came to fruition. So if something were to happen, it would make a lot of sense to link him to the Bills. A little bit older, though. I think he's 31. So you're putting yourself in that Von Miller situation again, is not necessarily with the same type of injury concerns, but is this a guy that you're going to get the most out of if you do bring him to Buffalo?
Yeah, the Hendrickson idea is really fun. I mean, you were one of the first ones on that. We talked about that almost a month ago after the season. But yeah, something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. And speaking of edge options, Sean McDermott was asked about Von Miller today, and if you hear his response, if you just heard it by himself without the question, you'd probably say, oh, excited about Von Miller. Like, maybe he's still in the plans. But it's interesting because he was asked the question, like, is Von Miller still in your plans? And Sean McDermott answered by saying, yeah, I love Von Miller. So answering the question without really answering the question, right. I don't know. The only way that Von Miller remains on this roster next year is if he completely redoes his contract once again, turns everything into incentives, gives the Bills a huge break on the salary cap. But to me, I'm looking at the other side of that June 1st deadline and the $17 million in cap space that becomes available on the other side for a potential Myles Garrett trade or one of these other areas. A Max Crosby trade, by the way, which I think Max Crosby is going to get traded. It might not happen in April at the draft or June or July or even August. It might happen around the trade deadline when the Ravens or the Raiders go into typical Raiders mode in that division, which is really good. I mean, the Broncos are better. The Chargers are the Chargers. And now the Chiefs have been the Chiefs for a decade. They're not going to compete in that division. And when it goes south, no matter what happens with Crosby this offseason, he's going to probably want to push his way out. So if I'm the Bills, and that's the guy that you want to target, you can sit back, remake the roster, and use some of the draft capital next year to go all in. And I think Crosby falls into a similar category for me as a guy that isn't just adding one player or being one player away. There's more of an impact that lies on the other side of that.
And I think Pete Carroll realizes that you might have to tear things down to right the ship there. Tom Brady, minority owner of the team, realizes the importance of the quarterback position and getting draft capital for Crosby at the trade deadline. That makes a ton of sense. And it could happen this offseason too. So yeah, great points there, and clearing some money works. Now, tip the cap to Joe B., our friend over at The Athletic. He did mention, though, maybe Von would rework the deal and bring his cap hit down significantly. It's in play. But at the same time, you might have to turn the page on from Von, knowing the age, knowing the limited snap counts that you had him out there for in some pretty meaningful games, and knowing that it's better to get younger, to try to do the same move that you tried a few years ago with a different flavor, a Max Crosby, Hendrickson, obviously a Myles Garrett, and kind of resetting what you wanted to do to get the Bills over the hump, and knowing that, Von Miller at this point just isn't going to be that guy.
All right, that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. We're here all week. We'll bring you at least 3 more episodes, so keep it locked onto the YouTube channel. Make sure you like and subscribe. It'll give you a notification every time we're going live. And, of course, if you're listening on the audio side, leave a 5-star review. We really appreciate that, any commentary that you have on the show. And, Ryan, send us out of here, buddy.
Yeah, check us out this Saturday at Wingnuts. We'll be with you, though, again here later this week, talking a little bit about what Brandon Beane had to say at the Combine. We will see you soon.